I'm former chief executive of Prologis and the author of Transfluence, a book about the opportunity that we all have to make a transformative influence on the lives of those that we serve. I'm back for another live chat today with some of the most thoughtful voices guiding leaders to be more human and be more effective. I'm joined today by Tommy Spaulding. Tommy is a great friend who I love. He and I have known each other for almost 8 years now. He believes in heart-led leadership, and he really shows it in all he does. His accomplishments, well, he's the author of 2 New York Times best-selling books. The first called It's Not Just Who You Know, and the second called The Heart-Led Leader. I've read both of them, and they're both fabulous. He was formerly the president and CEO of the world-renowned leadership organization Up With People. He's the founder and president of the Global Youth Leadership Academy and National Leadership Academy, both organizations focused on advancing leadership of high school students. Awesome organizations. I've spoken to both of them. Tommy's also a true thought leader and an incredibly inspirational speaker. He really is. Meetings and Conventions magazine recently rated him as one of the 100 most favorite speakers in the nation. He's spoken to over 1,000 organizations around the globe, and he also coaches executives on leadership development and basically has given me sage advice in the past. His new book is going to be released soon, and perhaps he'll give us a sneak preview later on in the interview. Tommy, it's awesome to have you on today.
Oh, Walt, great introduction. Love you, buddy.
Well, I love you too, man. Like you, or like me, I should say, you live in the great state of Colorado. So I got to start off. What mountain do you like to ski the most?
Well, we got married in Beaver Creek, but I think we're more of a Vail family, and not just because of the mountains, but I'm a foodie, and they have better restaurants there.
They do, that's for sure. More expensive, but they are better.
Yeah.
I have to admit. All right, so, Tommy, we're going to talk about some of the things that you write and speak about. But first, over the years, you've introduced me to your wife and your kids. Your son, Anthony, and I did 3 trips to Mexico building houses together. I mean, I know them well, and I know how much they mean to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your family and really what you love about them?
Yeah, I've been married for 17 years, just celebrated our anniversary. My wife was actually married before me. She had a 3-year-old boy at the time. Now that 3-year-old is 21. That's Anthony. And he's now 1 week away from being a plebe at West Point Military Academy. He's at boot camp right now at their Beast. And so he's attending West Point. And then we have 2 children of our own. Caroline, who's a freshman at Regis High School, who's 16 years old. And a son, Tate, that's 13 years old, going to 8th grade and quite the hockey player.
Oh, that's just great, man. I mean, they're awesome people. I tell you, I have a daughter and son, and last week was the first time that my daughter ever made dinner for Sue and I.
Oh, that's great. How was it?
Oh man, it was a seminal moment for me. It was really special. It's nice when they start giving back to you,
Yeah.
But anyway, so look, you were once CEO of Up With People, great people organization, and then you started Global Youth Academy and National Leadership Academy, which provide experiences for kids try to change their lives. You've been all about that. I mean, that's you. You like to change people's lives. What is it that drives you to make a difference in others?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. A few years ago, I was having a staff, Christmas party at a Mexican restaurant, and I have kind of 2 different companies. I have a nonprofit that runs those youth programs, the National Leadership Academy and Global Leadership Academy. So I invited our staff and volunteers of the nonprofits. And then I obviously write books and speak and have a whole team of people that put me on tour to coach and work with corporate America. And so I brought both these organizations together for the dinner. And they were drinking margaritas and getting into a nice Mexican restaurant. And one of the husbands of one of my staff members asked me a question that was pretty deep. And I'm like, dude, I'm drinking tequila, no deep questions. This is crazy. But he basically said, I've never met anyone that works with high school kids and then also works with Fortune 500 companies and coaches CEOs and coaches, 15-year-old kids. Like, how do you do both of them? And it was a pretty profound question. And I was on margarita number 2, so I wasn't feeling too profound, but it really made me think. And I basically said, well, if we do our job right at the National Leadership Academy and the Global Youth Leadership Academy and really teach heart-led servant leadership to high school kids, I wouldn't have to write books and coach corporate America because they would already know it by the time they got, out of college. And it really answered your question. I think heart-led leadership is needed, and to be a servant leader. And I've learned over the years that while they're coaching CEOs or coaching high school kids, they suffer from the same problem. A high school kid and a leader in a corporate America. If you don't love yourself, if you don't have self-confidence, if you don't believe in who you are, then you really can't serve and love people. If you don't love yourself, you can't love others, because you're always going to want the attention. You're always going to want the recognition. You're always going to have that empty hole in your heart to fill with the corner office, with all the acknowledgments. And when you truly believe in who you are in God's eyes, then you truly can live a life of servant leadership. And so what we do at high school kids is teach kids to love themselves so they can learn to love and serve other people. And when I coach corporate America, I'm doing the same damn thing.
I love that. And I couldn't agree with that more. And that kind of leads me to the next question. You published your first book, It's Not Just Who You Know. And the beginning of the book, you talked about the challenges you encountered as a kid and growing up, right? And in order to love yourself, you had to encounter these challenges. I think people have to encounter them. But you said a really great quote. You said, I may have gotten a 4.0, but only if I added my high school and college GPAs together, which is a classic, right? So, obviously you had academic issues. You had things that you had to overcome to build your confidence over time.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about those life challenges? Because we all have them.
Yeah. I suffer from dyslexia and really kind of severely dyslexic and have learning challenges. And so I did graduate high school with a 2.0 and college with a 2.0, and really struggled to get through high school. And I went to my guidance counselor in high school and I told him I wanted to go to college. I wanted to change the world. And he looked at my grades, he looked at my GPA, and he gave me a brochure called BOCES, which is a trade school in upstate New York. And that's where he sent me when I graduated high school. But I think of my learning challenges as a gift and a blessing, because what it did to me, Walt, is it taught me to work hard and not to allow a GPA or an SAT score, an LSAT, or a class rank, or all these numerical numbers that we tend to fit human beings in these boxes, that I decided maybe I'm not academically smart, but I'm going to be a genius in loving and serving people. And the dyslexia was a good thing, and it still is a good thing because I have to work twice as hard. And I'm not afraid of hard work and getting no for an answer, and overcoming obstacles, because I've been humbled at a very young age. When you grow up in the resource room, you know how to pull up your bootstraps, make things happen.
Do you talk to kids about that? I'm kind of curious. In your Global Youth Academy, National Leadership Academy, do you talk about your challenges?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that you have to do when you work with high school kids is you have to build trust, because high school kids are very different than coaching CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. High school kids can smell bullshit more than anybody. And if they don't trust you, they're not going to listen to you. And they're not going to learn from you. And so what we do really well at the National Leadership Academy and Global Youth Leadership Academy is we really build trust with these young people by being vulnerable and real, and creating that safe space where they can be vulnerable and real. And that's when the magic happens.
So true. So true. Building trust is the most important thing I talk about in my book, Transformative too. That's so important. Not only corporate American kids. So when I read your first book, the thing that struck me most was the emphasis you put on the motivation for relationships. The motivation. The why, right? So we all know, we got to build relationships to be successful. We get that. and that relationships matter. But you say it's not just who you know or what they can do for you, but what you can do for them.
Yeah.
It sounds more like a servant mentality, right? Than
Yeah.
sort of a user type motivation.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. We all have relationships, everybody, whether they're personal relationships or professional relationships. And no human being would ever admit this. But the way our brains are wired is when we meet people, in the back of our minds, this little brain is saying, what can I get from them? What can they do for me? How can they help my family? And it's like a transaction. And our maybe our hearts don't really want to feel that way, but that's the reality. Is we look at relationships of what we can get from people, and we have to reprogram our hearts and reprogram our minds from like networking to what I call net giving. When you meet people, instead of saying, "What can I get from them? What can I learn? What can I get from that person? How can that person help me?" When I meet people, I look at them and I say, how could I help them? How could I learn from them? How could I serve them? And it's really a switch from going from transactional to transformational. And it's really all about leadership. I mean, no one, would admit that they're a self-serving leader. That they all say they're heart-led servant leaders, and no one admits that they build relationships that are just transactional. But studies show that most relationships we have are transactional, and we want things from people. And I think we have to work really hard to humble ourselves and enter every relationship with, what can I do for that person? How can I serve that person? What can I learn from that person? How can I pour into that person? How can I bless that person? And when you live a life of serving others and building authentic relationships to help other people, you really have a blessed life. And by the way, you have a really incredible business as well.
Is it a mindset, Tommy, or can you build it? I mean, can you work on it?
Yes, it's both, but you really have to work at it. I mean, we're born selfish. We come out of our mother's womb crying, begging for food and attention, and we never really stop. That we want attention, we want to take care of ourselves. When I talk to kids, I always say, if you can understand the four most important words of leadership, you're going to be fine. But these four words are the hardest four words. It's not about you. If you can truly embrace your life with those four words, I'm not much of a tattoo guy, but if I got a tattoo, I'd put it right there in my bicep. It's not about you. Right across I write it right there. Well, under a cross with Italian flag, I'd write, it's not about you. Because those are the four most important words of leadership. And those are the four hardest words when you're building relationships. Because most people enter relationships where it's all about me. How could that person help me? How can that person advance me? How can that person help my company? Are they a prospect? Can they be a customer? What can I get from them? And I just don't look at life that way. When I meet people, how can I love them? How can I serve them? How can I learn from them? My life's been incredibly blessed because of that. So it is a mindset, and you can work really, really hard to form these habits while you're doing this. But it has to be authentic. It can't be fake. It can't be manipulative. It has to come from a very authentic place.
So let's talk about that authentic, the comment that you just made, because I think your second book is called The Heartland Leader, and you took all these examples of leaders, and you pointed out the things that they did to be heart led, and in that you talk deeply about vulnerability and transparency. And let's face it, man, vulnerability is a tough thing, especially for men, I think. Um, So can you talk a little bit more about, kind of that second book? And I think you actually went deeper in that second book, perhaps. And you talked a lot more about vulnerability, transparency, and the like. So I'm going to
Yeah.
let you talk a little bit about that now too.
Yeah. When I think about the heart-led leader, I get so much credit for writing this great book. And the reality is that I'm not that smart to write a book like that. It really came from a higher place. One, it came from the Lord, but two, it came from really two people that modeled what heart-led servant leadership, really is. And I wrote about them in my first chapter of my book, and that was Helen and Anthony Dirkwani. And they weren't rich, they weren't wealthy, they weren't CEOs of big companies. They were hairdressers, and they never went to college. And they came over from Italy. They migrated. They're 100% Italian. They met and they married. And their claim to fame was they were married and loved each other for 57 years. Walt, there's not that many people that stay married for 57 years, but my grandparents did. And they owned Helen and Anthony's hairdresser studio in White Plains, New York. And for 47 years, they ran this little hairdresser studio where my grandmother would shampoo women's hair and my grandfather would cut and style women's hair. And above that hairdresser studio was a 2-bedroom apartment where they raised 4 daughters in 2 bedrooms. And one of those daughters being my mother. And so I grew up in upstate New York every Sunday going to church, going to mass, and going to visit my grandparents. And they cooked a great Italian meal. And I just watched them. They were always holding hands. They were always kissing. They were always laughing. They were always dancing in the kitchen. I mean, I'm convinced they had an active sex life well into the late 80s, which I really hope that happens to me and Jill, you know? But they just really loved each other. They were totally the real deal. But after about 50 years of marriage, my grandmother had a massive stroke. And a stroke so severe, Walt, where she spent her life in a nursing home. And the doctors told my grandfather that his wife would never walk or talk again. The stroke was so severe that she would spend the rest of her life basically laying in bed at the nursing home. And my grandfather did not want that fate to her. But the way Medicaid and Medicare works in our country, as you know, when a stroke is so severe, they don't waste money on physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech pathology, because the stroke's so severe, you're basically not going to be able to walk or talk. So my grandfather went to that nursing home every morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. And matter of fact, he got there at 10 minutes to 7. And so when the doors opened at 7 o'clock, he was always the first person at that nursing home. And he would run, walk, or hobble as fast as he could to Helen's room. And for 7 days a week, from 7 to 7, he did physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech pathology, massaged her legs. He really worked with her. And my grandmother actually walked and talked again 2 years later. And it was a miracle. And when I wrote the story in my book, I interviewed the general manager of this nursing home. And he said, I was so touched. We were all so touched by your grandfather's devotion that he came every day and worked with your grandmother. Don't tell anybody, but I actually gave your grandfather his own key so he can let himself in and out of the nursing home. And it just shows his devotion of how much he loved, his wife. Well, eventually he died. He passed away of a brain tumor. And we all were at his bedside when he passed away. His 4 grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and we're all, around the bedside with hospitals helping him to heaven. And we're all praying and basically saying goodbye to him. We're all telling Anthony how much we love you. We call him Papa. That's how you say grandfather in Italian. Love you, Papa. We love you, Papa. We love you, Anthony. And with his last breath, he said, don't tell me you love me. Don't tell me you love me. But show me you love me. And then he died. And he went to heaven. And for years, I wondered what the hell my grandfather meant by that. Don't tell me you love me. Show me you love me. And it wasn't until I started writing books and really taking thought leadership and servant leadership and heart-led leadership into my heart and writing these books that I realized what my grandfather was all about. Leadership is not telling people what you're going to do for them. Leadership is showing people what you're going to do for them by your actions. And that's what heart-led leadership, that's what servant leadership, that's what vulnerability and transparency, all these words of being a heart-led servant leadership really is to truly show people you love them through your actions, not your words. And we're really great about words, aren't we? This country, this world, we say a lot of things, but the real servant leaders just shut up and they just show their actions to their teams, to their employees, to their customers, through their actions. And that's what heart-led servant leadership is really all about.
When you coach, Tommy, when you coach leaders, do you talk to them about vulnerability?
Yeah, we just got vulnerability all wrong. I mean, look at our world. We actually thought the world was flat at one point, but it's not, it's round. You go on the internet and Google women smoking in the 1950s during pregnancy. There's pictures of very famous people with cigarettes in their hands with, 8 months pregnant in the 50s and even 60s, right? But that we know now that's not true. I mean, we've made so many mistakes in the world on how we look at things, and vulnerability is up there because we looked at vulnerability as weak. We looked at, especially male leaders, that we have to have all the answers, and that you can't cry, and crying is a sign of weakness. And if you don't know the answer, then just make one up, and because you have to have all the answers. And the most beautiful thing that a leader can say is, I don't know that answer, and I don't know, and I need your help to learn it. And the second most beautiful thing is to be vulnerable. And when I see a leader vulnerable and open and real, and maybe even shed a tear, it's a sign of strength. And the reality is in this generation, especially managing millennials, they will never trust you. Your followers would never trust you if a leader is not vulnerable and real and authentic. It's just a new way of leading. The old command and control, know all the answers, never shed a tear, on running like a ship. Those days are over. The organizations that are really thriving in the world are really run by women and men that are heart-led leaders, that are totally vulnerable and real. And people want to salute. They want to follow those types of leaders.
That's for sure. Okay, so I'm going to take that to the next step. I mean, I'm writing a follow-up chapter to Transfluence, and I don't know if I told you much about this, but I'm hoping to have it out in September. It's just one chapter, and it's on the topic of empathy, which actually I struggle with, and I think sometimes I think we need to rethink it because a lot of people are talking about, well, leaders need to be more empathetic, right? But what I struggle with is the notion that I can share someone else's feelings, right? I mean, I can put myself in their shoes. I struggle with that because sometimes I can, but many times I can't, and frankly, sometimes I can't even always put myself in their shoes, but I don't always even agree with them. I mean, you see things happening now in businesses where, you know, certain employees want certain things and the CEO says, no, I don't really want that for our company, but how do I be empathetic if I don't agree with them? And so I just kind of curious. I mean, I think it's a struggle. I do think we need to be more empathetic as leaders, but sometimes we all have trouble doing it. I mean, do you struggle with that too? And how do you handle it if you don't necessarily agree as a leader with the people around you?
Empathy is such a powerful word, and it was one of the words that I talked about in the Heart-Led Leader, to be empathetic. Um, wow, where do we begin? Empathy, starts and ends with how we truly feel about other people's feelings. And you remember the 4 words? It's not about you. When you live a life where it's really about others, you're always empathetic towards what other people are feeling. Um, I think that the part of empathy that I think that's lacking with leaders and all people is the follow-up with empathy. And I'm writing this about in my new book about influence coming out next year, that it seems like when people are going through good times, like Walt's your anniversary, you and Sue, you have an anniversary, your kid's getting married, or you got a promotion, or you IPO'd your company, or your kid just made a hockey team at Notre Dame, all the good things in life. We're easy to celebrate the goodness. But when people are going through a really tough time, a really dark time, sometimes we don't know how to follow up with empathy. For example, you and I both know a guy in town that's a former CEO of a bank, a very large bank in town, where his son, Teddy, was a victim of cyberbullying, and he jumped off a bridge and killed himself 2 years ago in Golden, Colorado. And I guarantee you his friends did not call him, not because they weren't empathetic that his son just committed suicide, but I think sometimes people are so awkward about when people are going through a divorce or have a kid on drugs or a suicide or bankruptcy or some dark stuff that goes in our lives, which goes on in our lives. We don't run towards them. We run away because we're afraid to follow up on empathy. So my thing about your new chapter coming out, which I'm excited for you, is that empathy is not just important to understand how other people feel, but when you have the action of empathy, following up and running towards people's pain, that's where heart-led leaders really fall short. And so think about all your friends out in the world that are having, a really tough time. Run towards them. Run towards their pain. Tell them that you might not know how they feel because you've never really experienced that. When my friend Scott lost his son through suicide, I didn't call him up and say, I know what you're feeling, because I don't know what he's feeling, because I've never had a kid jump off a bridge before. But my stepson has suffered severe depression, anxiety, and bad thoughts. And so as a parent, we've all struggled with our kids, and to be vulnerable through that and show empathy towards others is the only way to bring people close to your heart.
Yeah. Speaking of, you just started talking about your new book. Can you give us a sneak preview?
Years ago, I was actually listening to a good friend, John Gordon. He's written great books. I love him. I think he's one of the best authors out there. And he was talking about some research that was done years ago that the average person will influence up to 80,000 people in their life. That's all he said. And he went on to something else, because John's got ADD when he talks. He says a bunch of information. So he just said, the average person meets 80,000 people in their life. So I basically took that research and I dove down. Well, how do you meet 80,000 people? Well, it turns out that the average life in America is 77 years old. If you take 77 years old divided by 365 days a year, the average person meets 2.8 people a day. From the time you're born to the time you die at 77, you meet 2.8 people a day. 2.8 people a day times 365 days times 77 years is exactly 80,000. That's how the research got it. So in our lifetime, you and me, well, we might meet more than 80,000 because we're influencers, but the average person meets 80,000 people in their life. When I heard that, I realized, well, what if you got to meet all those people before you die? Like, you don't just influence them throughout your life, but what if they all got together and said goodbye to you? Where would they fit? Well, I Googled, and it turns out there's actually, 40 or 50 football stadiums that have actually exactly 80,000 people, Notre Dame being one of them, 80,000 people. I know Penn State has over 100,000 because it's much bigger state than that, but the average stadium is 80,000 people. So what if at the end of our lives, that before we go to heaven, that we all walk on the 50-yard line of our favorite football stadium, and every single person that you've influenced in your entire life, all 80,000, they're all there at the stadium saying goodbye. And the question is, are they going to be chanting your name? Walt, Walt, Walt. Are they going to be cursing your name? Are they going to be giving you a stand ovation because you've changed their life? You had a huge influence on them? Or are they going to be, cursing your name because you've hurt them? And the book is about, how do you live a life that's unforgettable towards people? How do you live a life where you truly have a huge influence in people? So at the end of your life, there's 80,000 people giving you a stand ovation, thanking you for the impact you had in their life. And, I think, you're a master at influence. You wrote a book about it. And what I believe about influence is that people are never going to remember how you led them. They're never going to remember how you parented them. People are going to remember about the influence you had in their lives. And I believe influence is all about leadership, and leadership is all about influence. And I'd like people to start thinking about, what if you actually met all 80,000 people? What if you actually met them in the stadium? Would you live life differently? Would you treat people differently? Next time you got a coffee at Starbucks and said hello to the barista, is it a transaction? Or you give them the compliment on their curly hair, or making them smile, or thanking them, or asking their name or their story? Well, I wrote a book in my new book about you and me. Remember we went to that deli in New York City? Remember we went to bagels? And I have this whole story about taking my good friend Walt, who's the most polite guy I know from the Midwest, to a Jewish deli that's cutthroat. The Seinfeld thing, the soup Nazi. You don't order your soup next. Well, the lady at the S's Bagels on 53rd and 3rd, it's a true Jewish deli. Line out the door. I took you there, and I was praying that we weren't going to get Barbara, because Barbara's tough. If you don't know your order, she throws you to the back of the line. And you and I came up to her, and we started talking to her and asking her questions. And I've been at that deli every time I go to New York. I'm at that deli. I'm always seeing Barbara, and she's so tough as nails. She's always rude to me. And she's never nice, but you and I killed her with kindness, didn't we? We asked,
Good.
and we asked her what her favorite thing was. We asked her name, and we talked about, ourselves. And by the end of the line, what did she do? What did she do when we got our bagel? You remember?
All I can tell you was the best bagel I've ever eaten in my life.
Well, she actually came around the counter and gave us a hug. And
Oh yeah, I remember that.
and there was no water glasses left. We wanted a glass of water. So she reached into her tip jar and got $2 out, and she bought us both bottles of water. And I've been back to SS Bagel since then. And every time I see her, she wants to hug. So the bagel Nazi is now a hugger because you and I cracked the shell and we were vulnerable and we're real and we had a human interaction with her. Barbara's going to be in our stadium, Walt. She's going to be in our stadium thanking, because most people are just a transaction, her little bagel shop. But we didn't treat her that way, did we, Walt? We loved her. And we served her. We got to know her story. And every time I'm in there, I talk to her now and give her a hug. That's the difference between having a transactional relationship and a transformational one. That's the difference between having a stadium of just booze, or maybe a quiet stadium, or a stadium of 80,000 people just clapping, saying, thank you for learning my story. Thank you for learning my name. Thank you for serving me. Thank you for making a difference in my life. Thank you for investing in me. I mean, Walt, I'll never forget, years ago, we were at my house for dinner, I guess 5-6 years ago. We're having dinner on a Tuesday with Sue, and Anthony's with us, and he's in high school, sophomore, struggling, trying to figure out who he is. And you're telling Anthony that you're taking a bunch of Colorado Uplift kids to Mexico to build homes for the poor called Homes for Hope. And by the end of the dinner conversation, you asked Anthony if he wanted to join a couple days later. And he went, and it changed his life. And then he went back 2 or 3 or 4 times with you. And the impact you've had on my son, you'll be in his stadium, and, and he'll be in your stadium, and he'll be cheering really loud for you, Walt, because you made a big influence in his life.
I couldn't believe he said yes. Sue couldn't believe he said yes. But he did. 2 days later, he was flying to Mexico with the two of us. And what a great time we had with him. Just Sue, he and I. And so, I mean, Tommy, that was a special weekend. It really was. And as you said, I think he went back at least 2 other times with me the next 2 years, maybe 3. But it was a number of times. And I'm glad it made a great influence on his life. It actually leads me into another question. And you've answered it with this example. Maybe you have another one. I don't know. But I actually think effective leaders not only have the ability to think big, as everybody calls that, Liz is a great leader. He or she thinks big, but also does the little things when it comes to caring for other people. What you just described that happened to you and I in New York was the little thing, but it turned out to be big. If you think about, whether it be your leadership academy or, some of the people, the leaders that you've talked to, are there any practices that you employ, or anything that you've seen people do, that might seem little at the time, but actually have a big impact?
When he first said that, I thought about when I was CEO of Up With People. When I became CEO of Up With People was a huge global force, one of the largest nonprofit leadership development programs in the world. And when I became CEO, it was a really struggling organization trying to redefine itself. And we had a couple hundred employees in the office, and had to set a new vision, had to travel to Europe and Asia, work 100 hours a week trying to re-engage the alumni. And when I left Up With People after 4 years of reinvigorating the organization and relaunching it with a new mission, what my legacy wasn't setting a new mission and new invigorating, vision and, raising money and all the incredible things that we did to relaunch Up With People. What my legacy was, the bookkeeper came to my, going away party, and she walked up to me and she said, I'll never forget, a couple of years ago, you came up to me in my office and you showed me that and thanked me that she was doing all these cost savings. Like, instead of just throwing stamps on the bunch of letters, we had hundreds of letters every day. She got actually a poster meter. So we actually weighed postage and we saved hundreds of dollars. And instead of offering employees just parking passes for $150 a day. She asked some employees if they want to take the bus in or the train in, and got them passes and saved money. She had all these things where she was saving money. So I asked her if she wanted to have lunch. And I said, hey, next Friday, I'm going to take you to lunch anywhere you want to go. And while we had Fridays, we always wore jeans, and it was casual dress down days and up with people. But that Friday when I took her to lunch, that young lady, Stephanie, she was wearing a prom dress. I mean, she was dressed up because she was having lunch with the CEO. And we had a great lunch and asked her about her daughter and asked her about her life and really got to know her. And when I retired and left Up With People, that was the one thing that I left when I left that evening of my goodbye party. Is she said that was the greatest influence that the CEO took time. And she actually grew in that organization from the bookkeeper to the chief financial officer and all that, and which is a great story. But it's the little things that we do. Your big grandiose visions and how we speak and how we lead, and our financial analysis and our strategic planning and all the great things that come out of leaders. That's not really the big stuff. The big stuff is the little stuff, is how you treat people. How you call customers up and just to see how they're doing. When you take time to learn the stories of your employees, of your people, that's the stuff that really matters. And unfortunately, we're just so busy because of these things that just occupy our lives. But when we take time every day to really pour into people and to take time to really find people's stories, Jill says it best, my wife, everyone has a story. Every human being on this planet has a story. And our jobs are to learn their people's stories. Unfortunately, most of us go through, 70 years of our life, and we don't really learn the stories of our loved ones because we're moving so fast and so transactional. And the great leaders know the little things about learning people's stories.
Isn't that the truth? So, Tommy, one last question for you that I like to ask everybody. What are you most grateful for?
Well, I'm grateful for my relationship with God, with Jesus, to have him in my heart. I don't know how I would have overcome a lot of my obstacles in my life knowing that Jesus loves me. I'm grateful that I have a wife that truly loves me, who I am. I'm grateful for the health of my children. And I'm really grateful for the mentors in my life. I've made a lot of mistakes, Walt, in my life. I have not done everything perfectly. But one area in my life where I've really hit a home run is I've been really intentional with who I invited in my heart and who I invited to mentor me. And I got people like you and Frank DeAngelis and Papa Jerry Middle. And I have these men in my life that helped me become the man of faith that I am, the leader that I am, the husband, the father, because I've surrounded myself with, amazing men and women that have really mentored me and taught me along the way. And so I'm really grateful for those men and women that helped me, become the man I am today.
Well, Tommy, I just want you to know how grateful I am for you being in my life. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for being on today. I mean, just pouring out your heart to everybody on today and being so gracious with your time. Really, really appreciate it. It's been awesome having you on. And I'd just like to thank everybody for tuning in today as well. Hopefully you got something out of this. I did. I always do whenever I have a conversation with Tommy. And by the way, if you want to learn more about Tommy's work, his website is tommyspaulding.com, Spaulding. And if you'd like to learn more about Transfluence or my upcoming chapter, just tune into waltrakowich.com. And make sure you keep an eye out for future LinkedIn Live conferences and events that interviews that we have. We like to have them roughly on a monthly basis, give or take a week or so. And in the meantime, I just like to encourage everybody to find a way to have a positive influence on those around you each and every day. Tommy, thanks again for being on. You're awesome. And bye, everybody. Look forward to next month.